I'm Kimberly Underwood, Senior Editor at AFCEA International's Signal Magazine. I'd like to welcome you to our executive interview series. Today, I'm sitting down with Ms. Carey Miller, Managing Director of the Cyber and Strategic Risk Practice at Deloitte & Touche LLP. As a leader in the defense, security, and justice sectors of Deloitte's government and public service practice, Ms. Miller has more than 20 years' experience delivering cybersecurity consulting services. In her role, Carey leads projects helping Defense Department clients in developing comprehensive cybersecurity strategies and capabilities. She has primary responsibility for Deloitte's presence in the Huntsville, Alabama region, where she has developed leaders and teams who specialize in solving challenges across workforce transformation, digital engineering, IT modernization, and mission security. Carey is also passionate about promoting STEM education, especially amongst young women. Ms. Miller has also been recognized by Federal Computer Weekly as one of the top 100 federal consultants for her role in shaping the national strategy for trusted identities in cyberspace, also known as NISTIC, back in 2010. Today, Carey is going to speak with us about operational technology, or OT, which is the computer and network systems that monitor and control physical processes and infrastructure. Electric utilities, water treatment, manufacturing facilities, and embedded systems such as weapon systems all rely on key operational technologies. With the increased automation and digital connections of OT, the cybersecurity risks have greatly increased, presenting new challenges, additional training requirements, and educational needs of the cybersecurity workforce. And Carey's going to walk us through all the ins and outs of this exciting area of OT cybersecurity specialization. Carey, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Kimberly. I appreciate the invitation and all the work that AFCEA does in our community.
And I'd love to jump in and kind of ask you about OT. We're in this big, greater field of information technology, or IT, but what's the difference really between IT and OT?
That's a great question. So as you might expect, IT and OT are two worlds really that are spinning so closely together. They overlap often. And lots of the ecosystems that we think about when we think about cybersecurity actually include both. In terms of definitions, IT systems focus more on the creation, storage, transmission, and processing of information or data. You think about how you use your computer every day, right? OT systems focus much more on control of physical processes. You referenced that earlier. Infrastructure, weapon systems, things that directly interact with the physical world. When I think about those two, I really think about three major differences, although there are obviously quite a few others. The first is life cycle. IT systems, you think about your typical CIO, they often have the opportunity to replace or upgrade their systems every 3 to 5 years. Operational technology systems, or OT, can have life cycles that span 20 to 40 years, sometimes even longer. A second major difference is access. OT systems aren't really designed for a traditional patch, like a patch weekend or a patch Tuesday like we see in IT systems. They're not often that accessible. They're sometimes not easily and automatically updated or refreshed. The third is adversarial intent. This is a really important one. If you're thinking like our adversaries do, in IT systems, the target is information. We want to see, modify, or deny access to data. In an OT system, the target is the process. If the adversary can control or change the process, then he or she can have direct impacts in the physical world, often with much higher consequences. There's also I often hear from some of our clients that, our OT is air gapped. They're not directly connected to the internet. But the reality is, even if they're not continually connected, there are components, the software in those systems, for example, that have at some point been connected to the internet. And as a result, there are cyber risks there in the supply chain or embedded in the software in those systems.
Right, sure. And what are some of the unique aspects about OT systems that may require, the workforce to have different skill sets or training for cybersecurity protections and the associated personnel? Thanks.
Sure, that is kind of where the rubber meets the road often. If you think about a system that controls a physical process, think a manufacturing plant, for example, availability and safety, or in the case of weapon systems, survivability are key considerations in that OT world. A second, I think, tremendous consideration, which impacts the skill sets, which gets to the question you asked about, Kimberly, is that in the cyber world, professionals are expected to be able to measure the impact of a cyber attack. If an adversary gets in, what can he or she do? And because operational technology manages and controls physical processes, those can be quite different and quite diverse. If you think about IT, most cybersecurity professionals in the IT domain, information assurance domain, have computer science degrees. They have a deep understanding of the IT environment. Maybe they're system administrators or computer programmers or network engineers that have learned the entire process associated with, the life cycles of IT. People have an intrinsic understanding of the way it all works and how it all works together. That same kind of context is not easily achieved in OT systems, particularly because they're so diverse. So if you think about the skill sets that are required, you really have to have knowledge in the specific sector or the vertical that OT system operates in. Think about electric utilities or transportation or wastewater treatment, manufacturing, chemical, aircraft, mission systems. I mean, those systems are so diverse. And if you don't have some level of engineering background that is specific to that sector or vertical, then you really aren't going to be able to dig into the cybersecurity impacts. Along the same lines, that engineering level understanding of the process being controlled, like what is actually happening, how does it happen, what are the parts of that process that are controlled and by what or by whom? Those are very different. And if you want to help secure operational technology, you have to have an appreciation for that at the engineering level. I think there's also many of those systems have significant dependencies on the systems around it. They are systems of systems. And so, analyzing and understanding those dependencies on the other systems is very important. And all of those require knowledge and skills outside of traditional IT-based cybersecurity. One of the things that I'm very passionate about, diversity, equity, inclusion, and this is a case where experiential diversity is absolutely critical. There's virtually no way a single any individual could, engineer and improve the cyber resilience of a system of systems in this kind of complex OT environment. So specialists have to be able to work within a diverse team with lots of different experiences and expertise to collaborate, to communicate effectively, especially in cases where they might speak different languages. You think about, the engineering language, the language that mechanical engineers and chemical engineers use in their jobs is very different than a lot of the taxonomy in the cybersecurity domain. And so I think there are some soft skills there. That's not necessarily different than IT, but I do believe that this experiential diversity and the need to collaborate and to work closely together, brings a lot of different skill sets together, if that makes sense. I also think just one more point. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But I think that the uniqueness and the complexity of this environment means that our cyber professionals need tools. They need cyber tools that are tailored to the domain that they're operating in, to the systems that they're working in, a toolbox that crosses the entire cyber lifecycle, right? There's a lot of development in the commercial market of operational technology, specific sensors and software to defend in that space. And that's one component. But if you think about that whole life cycle, I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
Right. And where are these skills learned right now for those kind of unique OT sensors and other platforms?
This is a little bit of a hot button for me. Today, I would say most of those skills are developed in very specialized environments. Someone has to actively seek education in these areas in order to attain it. For example, commercial training providers like SANS offers 4 or 5 different cybersecurity courses tailored to the OT environment. But to my point, they're expensive and you have to seek those out. There are government organizations, Defense Acquisition University, Department of Homeland Security, that sponsor ICS cyber classes online or in person. There are universities that are beginning to develop nascent courses and establish cyber curricula that specifically address OT, or that importantly, and I think most effectively, combine an engineering degree with a cyber degree. Some large organizations have developed in-house training. Deloitte has, for example, that's very specific to the OT environment. But I think the reason this is such a hot button for me is that the requirements for the skill set are absolutely essential now. We have such a huge gap. And I think we can only resolve this tremendous gap, this tremendous requirement, if we get further left of the problem. And when I say further left of the problem, I mean earlier in the education life cycle, right? One of the partnerships we have at Deloitte is with a magnet high school that's building a dedicated cyber and engineering curriculum at the high school level. The curriculum prominently features physics and chemistry and advanced classes like that, that when combined with cyber, result in what we often refer to as a purple unicorn graduate, right? One that's capable of further specialization in engineering or OT systems with a foundation that might accelerate his or her entry into the workforce. One of the special parts of that school is that they provide hands-on application of the education, both at the school and in their senior year in a real-world internship. And I say that's important because, we talked about the experiential diversity, we talked about the need to collaborate, but I think this type of learning requires immediate application in order to really stand the test of time. If you think about the future of learning, which is closely related to the future of work, when you think about workforce transformation, that future of learning focuses on micro-learning techniques where the student learns something and applies it in a real-life setting almost immediately. Because research shows that after only a single month, only 5 to 7% of classroom-based learning is retained. So this is an area where that hands-on process is incredibly important. I'm super proud of our work with this particular school, and I think it represents a lot of great progress, Kimberly, but I don't think it's enough. I think when you think about the magnitude, the shortfall in people to fill cyber positions, which are estimated at between 500,000 and 1 million by the end of this year. So now, right? That demand's going up. Cyber's everywhere. We're all very dependent on connected devices. I'm a mom of 3 young children. I'm a huge believer that our elementary, middle, and high school students should be exposed to cyber risks and the way you manage cyber risk in both IT and OT. If you think about people as kids, as future homeowners, as drivers of potentially autonomous vehicles someday, as voters who use machines for important decisions, then the exposure to and the expectation that an individual understands and manages personal cyber risk will only increase. And, if you look at it at scale, it's really, there's a direct relationship to homeland security, to cybersecurity in the homeland. So all to say, I think it's absolutely critical that we continue to drive exposure and experiences with cyber, not just in IT, but in OT, much early in the learning life cycle.
Right, sure. And Carey, can you walk us through what it means to hybridize the workforce to grow these OT cybersecurity specialists?
Sure, that's a great question, because there's a movement to harness some of the power of the workforce that exists today, right? And what hybridizing the workforce means is it means that we need to bring people from the IT community. How do we train an IT cyber operator to understand OT? And how do we train an OT engineer to understand cyber? And really make sure that they are both, that we are collectively conversant in OT architectures, in the process monitoring and control, and the cyber risk that occurs in that environment. We also need to take professionals who have experience in a particular OT vertical and teach them cybersecurity. But again, that will take small, focused, autonomous, experientially diverse teams that are brought together to solve those complex problems, because it's a life cycle problem. I mentioned tools earlier, Kimberly, and I think the need for educational tools that replicate the specific OT environments that these operators have to work in, these complex systems that make it easier to touch and see and even simulate the way that cyber can impact an OT system is really important. Here at Deloitte, we're building a portfolio of demonstrators that meet our clients and our teams where they are from an education perspective, but that are tailored to the technology space that's most relevant to them. So think about how cyber would impact a satellite in the space ecosystem, or how it might impact a drone for those that are building and protecting unmanned aerial systems. Even medical devices and water pumps, sometimes you have to see how an adversary might approach an attack on one of those specific systems in order to understand your role in preventing it. And that goes back, forgive me for being repetitive, to that life cycle approach that I mentioned earlier on. You know, what cybersecurity requirements should be defined during the requirements definition process when you're putting together your requirements for one of these systems. How is cybersecurity embedded in every single step in that life cycle? How do you test for it? How do you develop a defensive cyber operations approach that's tailored to the mission and the system that you're operating? If you think about defending, as I mentioned, satellites, that is wildly different than defending a medical device or an installation or a manufacturing plant, for example.
You mentioned private sector and universities education in cybersecurity for OT. But what can the government and industry do to expand workforce development opportunities, to expand the pool of available specialists in this particular area of OT?
That's a hard question. I mean, the most immediate, I think, way to build the workforce pipeline is certainly through students who are that are applying for and receiving their advanced degrees. I think another untapped area is early career professionals who are trying to specialize. In my opinion, that there is a group there who believes that they don't know anything about cybersecurity, but in reality, so many of their backgrounds are absolutely relevant in the cyber field. I think about an English major who could help us define and develop policies for cybersecurity, or write technical documentation as an example, thereby learning some of the cyber skills that we need, and perhaps pivoting into a different role later in their career. I think mid-career level people who are looking to change professions, I would encourage all of them to look at cybersecurity. The demand is so great. And I think a critical group are those senior professionals who have a tremendous amount of experience, but might need to layer some of the latest and greatest cyber expertise on top of that. And importantly, I think targeted programs have to be developed for each one of those. You mentioned earlier my passion for women in STEM. I think a second huge need that is incumbent upon all of us, government and industry, is to recruit those who have historically shied away from technical or specialized careers. We need to attract more women, more ethically diverse populations. And I think, that's a business imperative, not only because it helps fill the workforce gap, but because I believe diversifying the workforce can also result in different approaches to solving complex challenges. We talked about experiential diversity earlier, but here we're really talking more about demographic diversity and cognitive diversity, and getting all of those people in a room and asking them to collaborate on some of these big issues. I, of course, think universities play a huge role. Certification programs, boot camps, commercial training, military technical schools. And as I said before, I think secondary education, I think our school systems have to advance their thinking on this topic. My kids have cybersecurity days at school. They focus on it for a day, but it should be embedded in the curriculum across the board.
Right, sure. And although there's this limited, cybersecurity OT workforce right now, what can be done to maintain that workforce is a diverse workforce, even though the pool of potential workers is so limited?
You asked about government and industry earlier, Kimberly, and I think this is a place where it kind of comes down to leadership at both the macro level, like defining commander's intent, if you will. We would like as leaders to see more diversity and to make sure that we're being inclusive when we offer people roles. But I also think this is a place where an individual can have a tremendous impact as you build teams, as you consider how you put together, like in the consulting industry, as I think about how I put together a team to go solve one of these challenges, how do I make sure I have people that are diverse across all three of those areas I mentioned earlier? How do I make sure I'm pulling somebody in who might want to be a cyber expert but doesn't have those skills today, and building that next generation cyber expert, and then not just sort of setting the expectation of inclusion, but enabling, incentivizing, encouraging, reinforcing the need for collaboration and knowledge sharing across those groups of diverse backgrounds, I think is absolutely critical. I also think, I talked earlier about how specialized the OT environment is. I mean, the first issue is getting enough people in the door, right? And we can't have enough people if we don't, again, encourage more women and more ethnically diverse and cognitively diverse people to come to the table. I think we as cyber leaders have to continue to support STEM education initiatives, women in technology, girls who code, capture the flag exercises at all levels. The school that I was telling you about earlier, the magnet school that we're proud to be partnered with, they go to economically depressed parts of our region and recruit students who have a tremendous amount of potential, but who don't have the opportunity to attend a specialized cyber school, right? I think we need a lot more programs like that that are targeted at recruiting those diverse populations, and we will all benefit from the result.
Right, sure. And kind of to follow up on that last point you were making, kind of on the flip side, what role can diversity, equity, inclusion play in the growth and enrichment of, the OT cybersecurity workforce, but the workforce in general?
I've already mostly answered that question, Kimberly. I might have gotten a little ahead of you there, but I mean, it is that experientially diverse group of people that have to get in a room together. I mean, they have to, and they have to speak the same language, and we have to teach them that language and make sure it's the same. That will increase the efficiencies and will help people solve those challenges much more quickly. And I think, as this gets more challenging, as we introduce expectations around zero trust, as the diversity of these devices continues to increase, I feel very strongly that it is only a hybridized, diverse workforce with the life cycle of skills that we talked about earlier that can ultimately make the biggest difference in our national security.
Right. I definitely agree that having that diverse workforce, strengthens everything as a whole, for sure. Just one other last question. Can you talk about the convergence of IT and OT? People are speaking about this kind of convergence. What does that mean to you? And then how does our workforce development adapt to address it?
So that term, IT, OT convergence, it gets thrown around a lot, and it's used to describe a lot of trends within market and industry that are causing adoption and the intersection of IT and OT to blur. Like, where does one start and end, and where does the other start and end? High demand for automation and data-driven improvements to OT systems are also making that convergence occur much more quickly. We're automating processes that happen in between those two, which increases in some cases the cyber risk at those seams. Owners and operators want to produce things much more quickly and more efficiently, higher volumes, better quality, and that means the job is getting faster and much more technical. I think OT professionals will have to be able to adapt to that technology much more quickly. The OT life cycles are going to get shorter. If you look at the infrastructure bill, for example, that Congress just passed, I mean, that enables a refresh of a lot of operational technology that we haven't seen in many, many years. And that new technology, which gets adopted much more quickly and in higher volumes, drives convergence as well, because many of those systems that may not have been online before, the more modern versions will be online. So I think all of those things mean that the hybridized workforce has to be able to handle more and more. even as the expectation gets more specialized, I think that we also need people who can look across all of this entire ecosystem. I've mentioned that earlier, and see the risks, see where the seams are. The adversary will certainly look for those, and make sure that from an operational perspective, we're ahead of that adversary and we're defending our operational technology and our information technology across the board.
Well, thank you, Carey. Thanks for walking us through all of these operational technology, cybersecurity considerations, workforce issues, and about Deloitte's efforts. For more information about Deloitte, please visit www.deloitte.com/US/DSJ. And I'd also like to point you all to the additional Deloitte resources up on this slide, which we'll put up next. And then there's 3 reports they're featuring there, and you can access them easily via the QR code. So definitely check those out. Thanks again, Carey, and thanks to all of you, and have a good day.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Appreciate you letting me be here today.